Well, hello everyone. Welcome to all of our listeners to this video interview, which is part of the ITSS Verona members series of podcasts. My name is Will Quilter. I'm an analyst on the ITSS Verona Arctic desk, and with me is my co-host and colleague, Marco Dordoni, also a member of the Arctic desk. We are very lucky to be joined by our guest, Thomas Nilsen, who is the editor of the Barents Observer. The Barents Observer is a journalist-owned online newspaper covering the key trends and developments in the Euro-Arctic region and northern Russia, publishing in both English and Russian. The news desk is located in Kirkenes, a Norwegian Arctic town, just a few kilometers from the borders of Russia and Finland, in Norway's northernmost county, Finnmark. So we couldn't have a more informed guest with us today. We're very lucky. Thank you, Thomas, for joining us.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Just a brief bit of introduction on the European Arctic for our listeners. It differs not only from the other Arctic subregions because its coastlines remain ice-free in the winter, but also because it is the location for NATO's only Arctic land border with Russia. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022, it's clear that the political and strategic importance of this sub-region of the Arctic has altered as Europe's wider geostrategic environment has adjusted to the new reality since the full-scale invasion in 2022. And two, importantly, key states with territory in the European Arctic, Sweden and Finland, joined NATO between 2023 and 2024. But these are just small events as part of a wider multitude of things that have taken place in the last few years up there. So without further ado, Thomas, for our listeners who are less familiar with the region, could you give us a brief update on the latest developments and geopolitical dynamics in the High North, particularly anything that's happened more recently?
I think it's very important to underline that the Arctic is not an isolated place on the European map. So what we see up here in the High North is, of course, a consequence of what happens other places in Europe, and especially the worsening situation between Russia and the European Union and NATO. We are studying an area of the Russian Arctic, which traditionally have been very important for Russia because their only ice-free port to the North Atlantic is located close to the border with Norway in the Murmansk region on the coast to the Barents Sea. And this is the area where all since Second World War, the Soviet Union based their ballistic nuclear submarines when they got the first ones in the 1960s, and it was a kind of the center area of the arms race during the Cold War. So this coastline between our town of Kirkenes on the Norwegian side and the town of Murmansk on the other side, which is actually only a few hours sailing by boat, was during the Cold War the area where the Soviet Union had most nuclear weapons. And then after the Cold War, it was a huge disarmament process. But then again, started around 2010, 2011, Vladimir Putin put a lot of efforts into rebuilding a new modern Russian Navy. And that's where we are today. We are seeing that the Russian Northern Fleet, which is the biggest of all Russia's four fleets, today have much more modern vessels. It's post-Soviet designed vessels. And also very important, they have more modern weapons. And again, the nuclear weapons in the region plays a key role in today's security of Russia. So it's far away from Central Europe. It's far away from the war against Ukraine. But it is very important for Russia's national security and for their thinking. Also, the Arctic is the shortest route for ballistic nuclear missiles between Russia and the United States. So it's also for that reason very important for Russia to build a stronghold in the Arctic. And they have done so. Many new bases, a lot of new vessels, a lot of new cruise missiles and other missiles in the area. So you can say that this terminology that Norway used to sell in the years after the Cold War, we used to say high north, low tension. Well, that is history. Now it's high north, high tensions.
Thank you, Thomas, for this answer, and thank you for highlighting the main important things and also the current situation in High North. Now I would like to dive deeper into the region and its security dynamics. So my question for you is, in the event that a potential conflict was to spread from somewhere such as the Baltic region to the European Arctic, is it accurate to say that Russia would have a military advantage over NATO in this area?
Absolutely, and for both logical reasons, but also because the Arctic has always been very important for Moscow. But we have to look at the map from the top, look at the globus, and then we'll see that actually half of the Arctic is Russian territory, from the Bering Strait bordering Alaska in the Far East to the Euro-Arctic region in the border areas here between Norway and today's Russia. So it was important for the Soviet Union. It is important for Russia, and Russia has built several new bases in the high Arctic, like on the Arctic archipelagos of Novaya Zemlya and Franz Josef Land, and so on. We have seen after the full-scale war with Ukraine that Russia has withdrawn quite many of their army troops from the border towards Norway to the actual battlefields in Ukraine. And by that, we think that Russia doesn't have any tomorrow plans of invading Norway or northern part of Finland, which now have become a member, as you said, of NATO. But at the same time, they are putting many efforts into the Navy and to maintain the nuclear weapon and to kind of test and develop new weapon platforms and so on. But I think that from a Russian perspective, there is no immediate danger of a spillover effect, rippling effects from a conflict in the current conflict in Ukraine, or if there will be a larger conflict with the borders to Poland or the Baltic countries and so on, because it is in Russia's own interest to keep the Arctic an area without war-like scenarios, because that's where they have the main nuclear assets, and that is the final card in the game. So if we get a spillover effect to the Arctic areas, that means that we are already in a global conflict. And that is what I think everyone today is trying to do tabletop exercises in order to avoid, how to avoid a spillover of conflicts other places in Europe to reach the Arctic. Because when it reached the Arctic, there is a kind of danger of using exchange of nuclear weapons, which is, of course, a terrible scenario for everyone. But it is the last card in the play by Moscow. But also, I would like to add that high tensions and higher tensions between NATO and Russia means that there are way more military exercises taking place in the north, both by Russia, but also in recent years by NATO. Let me, for instance, give one example. in 2025, when Donald Trump says that he wants to withdraw troops from Europe, and that is the narrative in the media in many ways, we here in northern Norway, we are seeing the opposite. There has never been more American military activity inside the Arctic Circle in northern Norway than we have had in 2025. And when there are exercises, when there are surveillance aircrafts, submarines sailing and following each other in a cat and mouse games and so on, that is when accidents happens. And then we are kind of, what I fear is that there could be a scenario of miscalculations, that one accident is interpreted by the other as an aggression and so on. So danger of spillover in the effect of a kind of that we are not talking too much with each other on the Russian side and on the NATO side is a dangerous path that we are into right now. So many of these scenarios we were discussing during the Cold War, and Norway do have a hotline to the Russian Northern Fleet on the Kola Peninsula, and that hotline is specially designed to facilitate for contacts in case something bad is happening. But this hotline is one of the very, very few between Russian military forces and a NATO country. Norway is one of the very few that have such a direct line to Russian military in today's situation. It's important that we follow and monitor the situation, and that we take into account how to avoid that a miscalculation or an accident will escalate into what could be a full-scale war.
Thank you, Thomas, for that answer. Obviously, we've just been discussing the prospect of conflict in the High North, and the obvious efforts of confidence building efforts to try and avoid it. But there does, in any case, appear to be a growing narrative, particularly in media in Western Europe, for instance, that suggests that war in the Arctic is a foregone conclusion. It's inevitable. But I just wondered if you could help clarify the reality a bit further, and potentially kind of give us suggestions or explaining how we can better counter this hype about the Arctic as an inevitable zone of conflict.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up that question, because for me as a journalist, as an editor that is sitting in the Arctic and reporting for the Arctic, I should try to avoid criticizing other media. I mean, it's a free media, and journalists are doing a great job on trying to track the different developments that is happening. But you are perfectly right. It's a narrative in North American media and in Central European media that the ongoing climate changes, this opening of new shipping lanes, that the ice is retreating, that the glaciers are melting, will lead to a race towards resources in the Arctic, and that there are potential of conflict that could come out of that. And I strongly disagree with such a narrative. I mean, there are no borders in the Arctic that are disputed. The Arctic is an ocean. It's part of the northernmost part of the North Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean, where everything is cleared out in accordance with the international law of the seas, and who can sail where and so on. And there are no land borders in the Arctic that are disputed. So none of the Arctic states, including Russia, have any claims in other areas. And if someone believes believes that China could just go to the Arctic and start mining or oil drilling or pumping for gas or subsea resources on the seafloor and so on. No, they can't, because those areas are already regulated by the different nations in the Arctic, the 5 Arctic coastal states, which is Russia, United States, Canada, Norway, and Denmark with the Greenland, of course. So I'm much more afraid of a spillover effect from conflicts between Russia and NATO as such, like the Ukraine war or conflicts with Poland and the Baltic, that could have a spillover in the Arctic, and not that a conflict itself will start in the Arctic because of the race for resources or whatever it is. There is actually very little oil drilling in the Arctic, and my country, Norway, has been one of the major drivers for drilling for oil in the Arctic. And sorry to disappoint, but they haven't found much. There are some gas, but it is natural gas, but it's very expensive to exploit and so on. So that is one of the narratives that we are trying to tell journalists that are coming up here, that no, there ain't no conflict that will start over resources or melting ice or new shipping lanes in the Arctic.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. It's really interesting also to catch your perspective, so like from a journalist and not just an analyst or someone that is not on the field. So now I want also to ask and to jump into the current situation. So as a final question, I would like to turn to current events. And the hot topic today and also yesterday and also the last week was the negotiation between Doha and Geneva between the United States and Russia regarding the war in Ukraine. So my question for you is, if mindful progress were made toward the peace in Ukraine and a subsequent thaw in US and Russia relations occurred, what impact do you think this might have on the high north and Arctic geopolitics in general? Thank you.
That is the core of the tensions also in the Arctic. I mean, what now is happening in Ukraine, the Ukraine war, everything that has to do with our security in the high Arctic is today related to Russia's aggression. And if Russia loses the war in Ukraine, that will, of course, also could have potential positive consequences with lower tensions in the Arctic. Norway is a important supplier of funding and weapons to Ukraine. The same goes with Finland and all the other Arctic countries, Canada and its American weapons and so on. So a solution for the war in Ukraine will, of course, have very important consequences in the Arctic, and that positively if Russia withdraw their troops from what is Ukraine's territory. But what I'm more skeptical about is if there is a so-called peace deal that will only delay or to facilitate for a kind of new conflict in the future. If there is a ceasefire that causes that Ukraine has to give away huge territories, where Russia can spend another 5 years or 10 years to build up forces and again start an aggression against NATO territories, well, then that will also have very negative consequences for the high Arctic. So a peace deal in Ukraine must be based on Ukrainian premises, that the way they want to have a peace deal. Otherwise, it will only be a kind of ceasefire that could lead to even more buildup of weapons and so on. And from the other NATO countries' perspective, if Russia doesn't lose this war, well, the bad tensions between NATO and Russia will only continue, and we will go into a new Cold War scenario between Europe and Russia. And in a Cold War scenario, we have tried that before. That means that the arms race will continue, and it will especially continue up here in the Arctic, where the nuclear assets and where Russia has its main naval bases. That is, by the end of the day, the core assets of Russia's own security, if you've seen it with Moscow's eyes. So a peace deal all depends on how that peace deal will look like.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. You were perfect on time, even better. So I have really just last question for you, because jump in my mind also to conclude this interview, because you mentioned NATO, European Union, you mentioned climate change. So my question and my last question is like, in your opinion, are NATO and increasingly working in synergy with NATO, moving in the right direction by strengthening their presence in the North, possibly even abandoning or deprioritizing certain climate change initiative in favor of increased defense investments? What is your opinion about this approach of NATO and EU also in the North?
Well, there are military leaders that we are interviewing here in Norway, in Finland, and in Europe. They are underlining two very scary scenarios. One is an escalating conflict between NATO and Ukraine on one side, and Russia on the other, that could lead to the use of nuclear weapon. That will be a disaster for mankind. The other disaster for mankind is what we are actually seeing every day here up in the Arctic, and that is the climate changes and the consequences of the climate changes. And I want to underline that these two are very, very connected. But because for every day, tensions are growing between Russia and Europe, between United States and China, due to ongoing conflicts and competition, the big power game. The less time, the more of our focus is taken away from solving the big mankind problem today, which is the climate changes. So that is a perspective that we also always have to remember, that and we see it among scientists up here in the Arctic, on both the Russian side and in the Nordic countries, that they do not exchange data anymore on climate changes and so on. So, and that is bad for mankind's combat against climate changes. So on the security side, Russia said that they wanted NATO out of Ukraine, that they didn't wanted Ukraine to become a NATO member because that would bring NATO closer to the borders. But in reality, what Russia has achieved by the war in Ukraine is that they have really got NATO closer to the borders. First of all, with Finland and Sweden up here in the Arctic. That is bad for Russian security, but it is very, very good for our European security. Military forces in Sweden, Finland, and Norway are really working together today and are strengthening the security of European northern flank.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think you have given an excellent and comprehensive picture of the Arctic, both past and present. Even for those who may be less familiar with the region, unfortunately the times is up. But thank you so much, Thomas. If you want to follow Thomas, please follow Barents Observer because it's really interesting to read his articles. It was a real pleasure having you as our guest on today's podcast. And thank you also to our audience for joining us. And if you have any comments or enjoyed the episode, we'd be happy to hear from you. And for more podcasts like this one, please visit our website at www.itssverona.it or follow us on our social media channels. Thank you all, and thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.